What is up, my fellow Shield Brothers? Shield Brothers 6 here for the newly rebranded History Armada with your weekly dose of history. Today we're going to be talking about Captain James Cook and his sighting of Australia for the very first time for the English on that April 19th, 1770. Let's get started for today. So, Captain James Cook, who was he? Well, he was a British explorer who was out mapping and exploring the ocean for the British during the Age of Exploration. Why is he famous? Well, Cook explored thousands of miles across largely uncharted areas of the globe, surveying, recording, and naming features for the very first time. He had a unique combination of seamanship, surveying, cartographic skills, physical courage, leadership, and experience that combined to make him one of the most unique and one of the best explorers in British history. So, in 1770, Lieutenant, later Captain, James Cook, in command of Her Majesty's Endeavour, sailed along the east coast of Australia, becoming the first known Europeans to do so. On the 19th of April 1770, the crew of the Endeavour sighted the east coast and 10 days later landed in the bay of what is now southern Sydney. The ship's naturalist, Sir Joseph Banks, was so impressed by the volume of flora and fauna here into the unknown that the European science had yet to find, that Cook named the inlet Botany Bay. Remember that name. Cook charted the east coast to its northern extent, and on the 22nd of August at Possession Island in the Torres Strait, Cook wrote in his journal, "I now once more hoisted English colours, and the name of His Majesty King George III took possession of the whole eastern coast, from the above latitude 38 degrees south down to the place by the name of New South Wales." This name was already applied to the southern west coast of Hudson Bay, Canada, which was then being called New South Wales after his native land by the Welshman Thomas James on the August 20th, 1631. But James Cook used the same name for reasons unknown 139 years later. Maybe he just liked it. But this is the east coast of what was then called New Holland. Cook and Banks then reported favorably to London on the possibility of establishing a British colony at Botany Bay. The Kingdom of Great Britain thereby became the first European powers to officially claim any area of the Australian mainland, and it was named New South Wales, as defined by Cook's proclamation. Covered most of eastern Australia from 38 degrees south to 145 degrees east, near the later site of Morgalock, Victoria, to the tip of Cape York, which was an unspecified western boundary. By implication, the proclamation excluded Van Diemen's Land, later Tasmania, which had been claimed by Netherlands by Abel Tasman in 1642, and a small part of the mainland south of 38 degrees, later southern Victoria, and the west coast of the continent, which was then being claimed by the French, which was in 1772, even though it was then already mapped by the Dutch mariners. So they had most of mainland Australia and the east coast. The British remained this British claim of this new colony remained theoretical until the January of 1788, when Arthur Phillip arrived with the first fleet to found a convict settlement at what is now Sydney. Phillip, as governor of New South Wales, exercised nominally authority over all of Australia east of the 135th meridian east, between the latitudes of 1037 south and 4739 south, which included most of New Zealand except for the southern part of the South Islands. So here on this map you can see New Holland and the already mapped possessions by the Dutch, and you can see New South Wales written there, and you can see what was its boundaries, etc. So Botany Bay. 17 years after Cook's landfall on the east coast of Australia, the British government decided to establish a colony at Botany Bay. The American Revolutionary War saw Britain lose most of its North American colonies and considered establishing replacement territories. In 1779, Sir Joseph Banks, the eminent scientist who had accompanied James Cook on his 1770 voyage, recommended Botany Bay as a suitable site for settlement, saying that it was not to be doubted that a tract of land such as New Holland, which was larger than the whole of Europe, would furnish matter of advantageous return. Meaning that this newly found lot of land, huge lot of land, would provide income and growing land for the British. So you can see quickly how James Cook finding Australia, well, not finding, but discovering the, well, I say discovering, but locating the eastern coast of Australia was very adventurous to the British, and you can see in a second how this will quickly evolve into a colony and what it will be used for. So, a proposal for establishing settlement in New South Wales, which was on the 23rd of August 1783, proposed the establishment of a colony composed of American loyalists, Chinese, and South Sea Islanders. So, undesirables but not yet convicts. Matra reasoned that James Matra, that is, who was an American loyalist, reasoned that the country was suitable for plantations of sugar, cotton, and tobacco. New Zealand timber and hemp of flax could prove valuable commodities. It could form a base for Pacific trade, and it could be a suitable compensation for displaced American loyalists. Meaning, since you backed the loyalists, here, go elsewhere. And following an interview with Secretary of State Lord Sydney in 1784, Matra amended his proposal to include convicts as settlers, considering that it would be beneficial for both economy to the public and humanity to the individual, giving these convicts, which were at the time being rampant in the streets of England, a place to go. Lieutenant James Kirk was the first European to achieve contact with the eastern coastline of Australia in 1770. Matra's plan provided the original blueprint for the settlement, and records show that the government was considering it in 1784. The London newspapers announced in November of 1784 that a plan has been presented to the Prime Minister and now before the Cabinet for instituting a new colony in New Holland. In this vast tract of land, every sort of produce and improvement of which the various soils of the earth are capable may be expected to those. So it was basically saying, like, this is a land of milk and honey, come here, please. The government also incorporated the settlement of Newfoundland Island, that is, into their plan, with its attractions of timber and flax, proposed by Banks Royal Society colleagues Sir John Call and Sir George Young. At the same time, Unitarians and Reformers were campaigning in Britain against the appalling conditions in British prisons and hulks. Because, like I said, crime was rampant, and in the the Revolutionary War, these prison ships were ghastly places, horrific places, and similar ships and prisons were being used back in the English islands. So these humanitarians were looking for ways to abolish, but maybe reestablish the prison system, because it was horrific conditions, it was overrun by convicts, and it was just awful situation. So in 1777, prison reformer John Howard wrote The State of the Prisons in England and Wales, exposing the harsh conditions. And finding this, they found that perhaps convicts in England transported to Botany Bay was a threatening prospect, because it was unknown what Australia was really like, but it would be beneficial for the economy because they could work to grow and harvest resources, but it would also be easier because they wouldn't have to pay for housing and food for these convicts, and it would also be cleaner for them. So it was looking like this would be a good alternative, but also a frightening one. In 1933, Sir Ernest Scott stated the traditional view of reasons for colonization. It is clear that the only consideration which weighed seriously with the government was the immediately pressing and practical one of finding a suitable place for convict settlements. This is what Sir Ernest Scott said in 1933 about Botany Bay. In the early 1960s, historian Geoffrey Blainey questioned the traditional view of Foundation purely as a convict dumping ground. His book, The Tyranny of Distance, suggested ensuring supplies of flax and timber after the loss of the American colonies, saying that perhaps these motivations and the Norfolk Island was the key to British decision. A number of historians responded and debated. So the decisions to settle was taken when it seemed that the outbreak of a civil war in the Netherlands might precipitate a war in which Britain would again be confronted with the alliance of the three naval powers, France, Holland, and Spain. So that would push to a defeat. Under these circumstances, the strategic advantages of a colony in New South Wales described in James Matra's proposal was more attractive. So this civil war possibility in the Netherlands in 1783 was also a driving factor for colonization of Australia. Under these circumstances, the strategic advantages were very prevalent and very obvious in Matra's writings. Matra wrote that such a settlement could facilitate attacks upon the Spanish in South America and the Philippines, and against the Dutch East Indies, meaning it could also be a military strategic hold. In 1790, during the Nootka Crisis, plans were made for naval expeditions against Spain's possessions in the Americas and the Philippines, in which New South Wales was assigned the royal role of a base for refreshment, communication, and retreat. On subsequent occasions into the early 19th century, when war threatened or broke out between Britain and Spain, these plans were revived, and only the short length of the period of hostilities in each case prevented them from being put into effect and the colonization being used as a military base. So, George Forster, who had sailed under Lieutenant James Cook in the voyage of the Resolution, wrote in 1786 on the future prospects of the British colony. New Holland, an island of enormous extent, or it might be said a third continent, is the future homeland of a new civilized society in which, however mean its beginning may seem to be, nevertheless promises within a short time to become very important. And he's right, the Australians would be very key in a lot of the British endeavors for the next 200 years. So, as a merchant adventurer and would-be colonizer of southwestern Australia under the Swedish fact, William Bolt said that the Swedish ambassador of Paris, Eric von Stael, in December 1789, that the British had founded a Botany Bay, a settlement that in time would become of the greatest importance to the commerce of the globe. So you can see how this convict colony quickly became something much more, and something that would utilize and revolutionize British colonization, and how the Australians would quickly gain their own sense of identity. So the first fleet of 11 vessels carried over 1,000 settlers, including 778 convicts, 192 women, and 586 men. A few days later arrived at Botany Bay. The fleet moved to the more suitable Port Jackson, where Phillip established a settlement at the place he named Sydney Cove, in honor of the Secretary of State, Lord Sydney, at the time. This date was the 22nd of January 1788, and this date later became Australia's National Day, Australia Day. The colony was formally claimed by Governor Phillip on the 7th of February 1788 at Sydney. Sydney Cove offered a freshwater supply and a safe haven. So, you can see how this colonization expanded, and how Lord James Cook, Captain James Cook that is, just finding the East Coast, revolutionized and started a tidal wave of colonization and referendums, leading ultimately to what is now known as modern Australia, which is a unique and great country in its own right. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned something about Australian history. I hope you learned something about James Cook. And as always, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, you can leave me a like. If you did not, you can leave me a dislike. If you have a comment, suggestion, or a concern, you can leave that down for me below in the comment section. And this has been Shield Brother 6 with your weekly dose of history, and I'll catch y'all next time.